Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Andrea Butcher, founder and CEO of HRD, a leadership development company. Andrea leads the organization's growth strategy and focuses on key clients to help them accomplish their goals through their teams. She also hosts HRD's weekly podcast, Being at Work, and is the author of a new book, The Power in the Pivot. In this conversation, we talk about all things leadership. We talk about what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a leader versus a manager, and all the different components that go into building good leaders. Andrea talks about the importance of growth over time, about the importance of accountability, repetition, psychological safety, and how what we're really after is not a training exercise, but long-term growth and change. Ton of stuff packed in here. I love the way that Andrea is able to package some of her wisdom into bite-sized sayings. There's a bunch of them in here that I was jotting down. I think there's a lot for anyone who wants to be a better leader or who wants to grow better leaders. And hopefully that's most of us. Without further ado, here is Andrea Butcher. Andrea, welcome to the show. Very excited to talk leadership with you today.
Oh gosh, there's nothing better to talk about than leadership and influence. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, every problem is a leadership problem. So hopefully we can solve a few today.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start at the beginning. What is HRD? What kind of work do you do? And how did you come to do that kind of work?
So HRD is a leadership development company, and it is the only thing we do. And one of the things we say a lot is that training is for dogs and growth is for leaders, because growth is really what we're interested in. We ensure that, all of the work that we do is over a period of time, allowing leaders to struggle through the messy middle with accountability and focus. And that's when growth happens. And throughout my career, that's really been a passion of mine. Early in my career, I have distinct experiences where I recognized that leaders not leading were creating a lot of challenge for the business. And I was in an HR role early in my career, and all of the employee relations issues that I was managing through, I recognized, if leaders were actually leading, those issues would go away. So early in my career, I developed this passion for let's put energy and investment into equipping leaders, and then some of those issues won't pop up.
How do you define leader or leadership? Because you say if people were just leading better, but what does that mean? What is leadership? How do you define it? What does it look like to you?
Very simply, leadership is influence. So it's not about position. It's not about title. It's about mobilizing people to move in a direction, a shared vision, something that we're all passionate about. And a lot of times I think where we get wonky is when we confuse management with leadership. I think of leadership as the head and the heart, and management as the hands and the feet. And actually, the roots of the words really help to make that distinction. The root of the word manager is manus, which means hands. The root of the word lead is actually to go, to guide, to travel. So inherent in influence and leadership is taking people somewhere.
Oh, I love that distinction between the two. And why do so many people screw it up?
Because we're messy.
What don't people realize about leadership? What do they think it is, and what is it really?
Yeah, I think when we simplify it to it is influencing someone to action, it actually becomes a lot simpler. So it's about a relationship. If I'm influencing you to do something, I have to know who you are, what motivates you, what your priorities are. Then I'm going to be able to empower and encourage a new direction or a new action. But only until I do that, build that relationship, which is why we talk so much about trust and integrity, is because you'll only follow me if you believe in me and the direction in which we're going. So I think just taking the time to build the relationship it's such a simple thing, but we're often so caught up in our own world, our own stuff, and our own agenda that we miss out on simple connection opportunities.
So, talking about getting so caught up in your own stuff, is it fair to say that too often we are ego-centric, meaning just focused in on our own things, our own tasks, our own emotions, and being a leader requires us to be others focused, and that, to me, that's a skill that that most people don't come by naturally, and even if you do, you still have to hone it.
You got it. And what's so interesting about it is that in my experience anyways, like I can only be others focused when I'm secure in my own being and my own self. So I have to have done the work on myself to get to a place where I can put that down and give space for others to feel what they're feeling. So if I'm an insecure leader, it's going to be hard for me when you get emotional because I'm going to think it's about me.
All right. You just opened up a door to another wing of the house here as far as where this conversation could go. But I do love that. And we do a leadership development program at work. And a lot of it is individual improvement focused, because I think a lot of the same reasons that you're talking about. You can only lead others as far as you've led yourself. You have to be secure before you can lead others effectively, however you want to say it. What kind of work goes into getting secure with yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a lifetime, isn't it? It's a lifetime journey. And I do believe life is always giving us experiences that support our growth and our development if we have the courage to recognize the growth in the experience and the courage to process it and reflect on it. And if we're reacting to situation, we may miss out on those opportunities. So paying attention and also doing self-reflection exercises like values clarification. And you can see I have my feelings wheel behind me. So pausing to recognize like, okay, what's happening within me right now? I mean, there's a million different ways. I also think just taking a walk or listening to a piece of music or paying attention to what lights you up. I always think of whenever I'm thinking about self-reflection and exploration, I always think of that movie, Runaway Bride. Do you remember that old Julia Roberts movie? So she had all these relationship challenges and found herself like just right in preparation for marriage or engagements, like just running away because she never had taken the time to really get to know who she was or what she really wanted. And so she went through this self-exploration where she literally like made herself lots of different types of eggs to figure out what kind of eggs do I like. And it's a silly example, but think about, I remember when I saw that movie, I'm like, you know what? I don't have any idea what kind of eggs I like. And there's a lot of things about ourselves we've just done because that's what our parents did. That's what we think is the right thing. And who knows? Give yourself the opportunity to explore. Who am I and what do I love and what does light me up? I think that's such an important exercise.
Yeah, I agree fully, to the extent that I actually have a children's book coming out in late 2023 called How You Become You, that is all about
it's amazing.
Figuring out what lights you up. So you heard it here first. That's the first time I've mentioned it on here, but that will be coming out. I'm going to self-publish that later in 2023. So I'm preaching to the choir. Yeah, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Yeah, I fully believe that. Want to talk about that self-reflection though, because it's easy to self-reflect when you've done well. It is very hard to self-reflect when you have done poorly. And what are the triggers that people should be looking for in themselves to say, this is a teachable moment for myself?
I think we can feel that. If we're honest, we can feel that internal conflict. And as soon as that pops up, going within and taking a moment to pause. And you're right, it is so hard. In the spirit of talking about books, I have just published my first leadership book. And is called The Power in the Pivot. And it's based on the stories of 52 executives. And one of the themes that I highlight, which is where I think we find growth and power in the pivot, is leaning into and staying in the tough moments. You're right. We get uncomfortable. Something's gone wrong. And naturally, we want our defenses kick in. And that's natural, right? That's part of being a human being. We want to rationalize. We want to look for something to blame. And recognizing that tendency, because I think we got to give ourselves grace in that, like, going below the line like that is human nature. Staying there is a choice. So I can feel myself going negative. I can feel myself blaming, rationalizing, which doesn't feel good. I know that. Doesn't feel good. I can choose a different thought. I can choose. I don't have to believe that blame based or rationalization. I can choose something else. I can get curious. I can ask myself, like, what can I learn in this situation? Just that simple question is disarming and puts me into a curiosity mode, right? That supports my growth rather than keeping me there.
I like that question too, because it takes you out of blame mode. Like, this is my fault, or it's their fault, or it's what, I'm bad. I screwed up. They screwed up, whatever. Because I think that's the hard thing to deal with, is when you get angry and you're mad at somebody else for doing something or not doing something. Yes, you can change that thought, but it's very hard when that emotion flares up, especially when it means that maybe you weren't as good as you thought you were. So I like that. Just like, hey, regardless of what happens, like, what can I learn from this? I think is a great question to ask.
Yeah. Well, and because you hit on, I mean, we're all walking around with these imposter thoughts and these doubts, and in my work, and as I've done my own self exploration and reflection, it always comes back to some form of not being good enough. So those moments trigger that. And that's hard, because I want so badly to be better, to be something. And if I admit that I've not done well here, it's just salt in that wound, isn't it?
The bitch about it, though, is that you only get better when you allow yourself to admit that you weren't as good. It's like, only when I admit that it's my problem can I get over the fact, or only when I admit that I'm not good at something can I then get good at something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that the juxtaposition of that is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's so hard in the moment too, because we want to be good. We want to perform, and we're afraid that we're not going to be. And yet we only get better when we acknowledge that we are not going to be good in our first tries, especially, and then pursue it anyway.
It's that growth mindset. I'm sure you've read Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, which I love so much. It's so foundational, but just, yeah, that always being open to possibilities and growth, and rather than fixed. And it changes the whole vibe too. I think people can pick up on that, right? When there's that openness and vulnerability, and it's attractive. I think whenever I've gotten stuck in my, like, I'm trying to prove, or I'm trying to be, like, it just doesn't come off good. It doesn't feel good, and it doesn't come off good.
Yeah, I agree. Want to talk about growth for a second, like the word growth, because you said it, and I was going to ask you about it anyway, because you said it when we were prepping for this. Training is for dogs, growth is for humans. So you do leadership development. What does a leadership growth program look like that's different from a leadership training program?
Yeah, great question. It's my favorite question to talk through. And I'm curious to get your perspective on this as well. First of all, being invited to a leadership training program, I mean, who's going to get excited about that? I would not. It's not appealing, right? So that is like baseline. And most people would agree with that. And yet we are all growing all the time. I feel like that is much more appealing and support my growth. So just in the way in which we position it, it matters. It makes a difference. There's some really interesting research. It's an organization called the Fort Hill Company, and they looked at when learning fails to occur, what's going on. And so for people like me, that's really interesting research. They looked at lots of different learning programs over the course of a few years. And what they found were there were three primary categories of when learning failed to occur. It was because of lack of readiness or preparation, the learning event or intervention itself, the program, the content. And the third category was lack of follow-up. And so you probably won't be surprised that 60% of the learning failures were because of lack of follow-up. 30% were because of lack of readiness. Only 10% were because of the learning intervention, the content, whatever the program. And what I so appreciated about that research, and I talk about it a lot, is because traditionally that is where facilitators and HR and talent leaders have put their energy. Let's build this really great program. No, let's get people ready and let's hold them accountable and follow up and communicate and provide some repetition and opportunities to practice and opportunities to fail. And so we create growth experiences that have all of those things I just described. We spend a ton of time on the front end getting really clear with why now and why you and what is the area of growth and what's most important for you right now. We spend a lot of time telling the truth about where they are, some sort of baseline data. And then they decide, like, these are the areas I want to grow in. And focus equals growth. So it's not a 70-page assessment report that I'm trying to improve. It's these 2 to 3 areas. And then once we've defined that focus, we can create an experience where they're struggling together. They're trying things. They're failing. They're getting feedback. They're holding each other and themselves accountable. They're connecting with their leaders in some way for accountability over a period of time. And so all of our growth experiences, the minimum would be 6 months because it typically takes 6 months to see behavior change. And you want to give people time to struggle and practice and explore. And the last piece, so I've talked about time, I've talked about focus, talked about accountability. The last thing then in any growth experience is a really high level of safety. My guard will come down when I feel safe being vulnerable and open. If I'm going to get critiqued or if there's not trust in the process, it's going to be really hard for me to do that. So we create experiences where participants feel comfortable being who they are and exploring that and trying things. And so a high level of psychological safety. So when I think of growth, I think of those 4 components: time, focus, accountability, and psychological safety. Those are the ingredients that really help leaders to grow. Very different than attending a 2-hour training workshop.
Yeah. So let's break some of those down a little bit. You talked about repetition and accountability. What does repetition look like in a leadership growth cycle?
Yeah, great point. First of all, we have to get focused on the right behaviors. So let me just use an example. We have just finished a several-month process with a group of leaders at MasterCard. MasterCard is one of our clients. These are technical leaders that have gotten results on their own for many years, and now they're being asked to get results through a group of people. So they're influencing people in new ways. So MasterCard, incredibly development-oriented business, they put those leaders through a several-month growth experience to give them an opportunity to practice influencing their teams in new ways. At the beginning of the process, they go through an assessment where they determine, based on their goals, based on their jumping off point, 2 to 3 leadership behaviors to focus on. Maybe it's actively listening to diverse points of view. Maybe it's publicly recognizing the strengths of team members. So maybe it's just those 2 behaviors because they've never done that before, but they recognize that just those 2 behaviors are going to have a big impact on their team. So throughout this growth process, they're doing exercises and they're practicing the demonstration of those behaviors in lots of different ways. They're struggling with it. They're getting feedback on it. They have an accountability partner that they're working with those behaviors on. And so when I say repetition, it's around the behaviors that they've chosen to focus on. And at the end of the process.
Are they then setting with their coach or development professional or with their accountability person what those reps are going to look like. Say, I'm going to go, so these are the things I'm going to work on. I'm going to go do these 4 things this week. And then they come back and they set a new 4 the next week or whatever the cadence is. But they're setting specific actions that they're going to do. And then that's where the accountability comes in. Is that
you got it?
How
that's
it works?
Very well. That's very well said. So if we use the listening behavior, maybe the action is in my one-on-ones this week, I'm going to seek to understand before I respond. Right? Maybe that's a very specific thing that they say they're going to do. And then because they have an accountability partner that's going to check in with them and they know that their coach is going to be checking in with them, they're much more likely to follow through with that.
How many things can one person work on at a time?
Well, there's research from the 4 Disciplines of Execution. You've probably read that book.
I've not. I will have to check that one out.
It's really good. There's research in that book that talks about they studied a group of leaders across a year, and they mapped out based on the number of goals that the leaders set, how many they actually accomplished. Leaders that set more than 10 goals didn't accomplish any. Leaders that set 4 to 10 accomplished 2 or 3. Leaders that set 2 or 3 goals accomplished 2 or 3. The research really encourages 2 to 3 action items, goals in a growth setting in a period of time. So based on that, that's what we always do through our growth experiences, no more than 2 to 3 goals or focus areas.
Yeah. And that jives with my own lived experience. And I talk with a lot of people. We talk about process at work a lot. Like because we do sales. And so my peers and we talk about like, well, what's your process? How are you spending your days? How are you spending your time and energy? And a lot of people are like, well, my mind doesn't work like that. I'm not going to be like you and build this crazy process. And I always try to remind people, because I do have a pretty thorough process, but I built it one step at a time. And I would say, well, what's the next problem I need to solve? And I would solve that problem until it became habit and routine. And then I would figure out where the ship was leaking and I would go plug that hole and I would do it until that became routine. And I think that that's true with any growth area, is like, you can't do it all at once. Sometimes you can make radical change, sometimes. But I think most of the time, and what people should mostly focus on, is picking one thing that they want to improve and just make that thing part of how they live their lives and do their work, and then pick the next thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's when growth happens, when there's good focus. Yeah.
And that's like lasting, like real change.
Yes, you got it. I mean, that you just described why we do what we do. And then at the end of the growth experience, we always measure again, how often are you demonstrating those behaviors? And what we see is the needle move. So we were just looking at the data. We've taken over 500 leaders through growth experiences this year, and 75% of them have improved the frequency with which they're demonstrating those behaviors pre-post. 75% have improved in all of the behaviors they were focused on. Now, again, they were all focused on only 2 or 3, right? And I attribute that high percentage to that focus. I'll never forget, and you've probably had this experience too. Early in my career, I did a 360. And I was so excited. It was, I'd never done 360. I was leading a global team. And so getting feedback, understanding that perception was really important to me. And literally, I was sent a 75-page assessment report. Like, what in the hell do I do with this? I didn't have a coach. I didn't have anyone to process that. I am not someone to sit and read a 75-page assessment, like just not at all appealing to me. So I didn't really get anything from it. I don't remember anything specifically I took away from that exercise. It's too much, right? Too hard to process and digest.
That's good, because usually what happens is you just read the negative ones and then those stick with you and you second guess yourself all the time.
Well, it's probably what we were talking about earlier. I probably just forgot all of that, right? Denied it, blamed, rationalized it away.
You also, the other thing you mentioned before was safety and how important safety is. We all want to think that we are trusting caring leaders who have our employees' best interests in mind. And yet, safety is at a premium in the workplace. Like it's hard to come by in a lot of environments. So how do we actually create psychological safety for our people? What does it look like? And would love like any mistakes you see people making.
Well, I think it's going to be different for every single person, isn't it? Given who they are. And there are some individuals who will very quickly let their guard down and trust is assumed, and others where it's going to take a long time. So I think it's not a one size fits all. It's getting to know people and asking questions, being willing to say, like, I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm struggling with this, being vulnerable. Yeah, those are the things that I've seen work. In a facilitation perspective, I mean, we do a lot of naming what is, acknowledging how someone might be feeling so that people feel heard and validated.
What does that look like? Like, what are the words that you use to surface that stuff? Because that can be uncomfortable for leaders sometimes to step into, I don't want to say fluffy, but like to step into feelings. It can be hard in a work environment. I think maybe especially for guys even, to stop and check in on feelings with people. So what do those words look like? What are the words that people can use if they want to start practicing this?
So if that was the scenario, I would say something like what you said. I would say, this might be uncomfortable for some people. This might be uncomfortable for you. And we've created a process that you can find those pieces that resonate and work for you. We're going to meet you where you are through this. Disarming kinds of things. When I went through my coaching certification, I had a mentor coach who called it tentative talk, saying things like, I think we get ourselves into trouble when we're certain, like, I'm certain that this is going to be good, or like saying things like, I don't know how this is going to go. And, I'm not sure if you'll resonate from this, because it lets people off the hook. It creates an openness. And one thing I talk a lot about as a facilitator is, we have a growth experience that has worked well for a lot of leaders. My hope is that you can find value for yourself in the process. Another thing that we talk a lot about is that as facilitators and coaches, we have nothing to teach anyone. It would be very arrogant of me to say, like, I'm going to teach you leadership. First of all, that doesn't make sense because we lead from the essence of who we are as a person. So I can't teach you who you are. Like, you have to come to that through your own exploration. I can facilitate a process. And so saying things like that, talking about your role and what your hope is and where your heart is, opens up the space for people to experience it in a way that is going to be most helpful for them.
So I want to ask a question on that, because there's a fine line between, this is where the kind of the art comes into this. There's a line between giving people that space and letting them off the hook by caveating something and setting yourself up for failure. Where, because we've all seen people who are giving a presentation and they'll say something in the beginning like, we didn't have all the data until too late, or this probably doesn't make sense, but, and they're giving these negatives off the bat that they don't need to be. They're putting these negative caveats out there that are unnecessary and damage what they're about to say. But yet I do agree with you that there are things that you can say that let people off the hook and allow them to sort of step into the learning environment. So where's the line there?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you probably aren't going to like this answer, but I think there's a lot of intuition in the moment with the group. If I'm kicking off a growth experience with a group of leaders, I'm not just going to step in to that conversation blind. I'm going to have connected with them. I'm going to have a sense of understanding of where they are and what's going on with them. And So I'm hopeful that what I would say would be disarming and helpful for them. But it's going to vary based on their jumping off point and what they're working on and what's going on in the situation.
Yeah. As you're saying that, it seems to me like there are ways to focus it on them and like, hey, you're going to have a varied experience here. Not everyone's going to have the same experience. So there's a way to focus it on them. I think as I was thinking through this, asking the question, where you get into trouble is when you make it negative right away, when you assume it's negative right away, when you're making an excuse, trying to let somebody off the hook by saying like, you're probably not going to like this, or it's probably is a stupid idea. Like when it's negative, if it's neutral, you're probably in good territory. But if you step over into negative, that just becomes self-sabotage.
Agree. Yeah. You want to say things that are disarming and help them to drop their guard, not to discredit what you're doing. Maybe that's a
good way to say
think about it. Yeah.
Another question I have for you in how you put these programs together. I've been thinking a lot and reading a lot about experience design. And so that's kind of influencing some of my questions. And there's this weird balance dichotomy between things that are enjoyable and things that are difficult. And it might be counterintuitive, but often things that are difficult have the most long-lasting positive payoff, but it's not a short-term positive payoff. The things that pay off in the moment are generally not very hard. But they also don't last very long. And so there's this sort of sliding scale of long-term joy and meaning. And so how do you build a growth opportunity for people that is both engaging and fun in a way? And by fun, I just mean like they have a positive energy towards it, but that also is encouraging them to do things that are probably difficult and uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think timing is critical. So when we build in experiential exercises, they're no more than like 45 minutes to an hour. So it's not like prolonged challenge. It's everyone experiences the challenge and there's such good lessons in that. So then we debrief and learn. But any more than that, I think people could check out, or it could just get too uncomfortable. There's one exercise in particular. It's called broken squares, and it's literally pieces of construction paper, and they're cut in a way that when put together, they create 5 squares of the same size. And so you put participants into groups of 5, and then you tell them that your goal is to have 5 squares of the same size. And what they try to do immediately, it's a team exercise. And the only way that they're going to solve that is by looking to see what others have and giving away their pieces. But they don't. They focus on their square. And so it's a really good one for collaboration. It's a good one for new leaders because we say like now your focus isn't you, it's on what's happening around you. So they get that so clearly, but they have to struggle through it. And it's often painful. I mean, I've had people look at me like, are we done yet? Are we done yet? And it's like, keep going. You got this. Keep going. And then every time it's so cool after that, they're like, oh, wow, that was amazing. But they wouldn't have had that. It's exactly what you're describing. They wouldn't have that, oh, that was amazing feeling if they hadn't have struggled through it.
Yeah. That makes me think of improv class, because being a good improviser is all about focusing on what's going on with the other people and giving them what they need to be good in the scene. And then they're doing the same to you. And that's what makes you good. It's not you being good. It's them giving you things to respond to and you giving them things to respond to. Talk to me about debriefs, because in the reading that I've been doing recently on experience design, this concept of reflection and debriefing is critical. And I've had people on, I've had a Navy SEAL on here talking about how they debrief every mission and how critical the debrief is. I've had nonprofit leaders talking about reflection and growth exercises. So what is a debrief to you? What makes it good? Like what goes into the debrief?
questions, just starting with some open-ended questions. What was your experience? I also think that a good debrief is set up. So before the exercise, you prepare them for the fact that we're going to debrief. And one of the things I always say before those experiential exercises is the way you do anything can tell you something about how you do everything. So everyone's going into it with the mindset of, okay, if I'm paying attention to how I'm showing up in this exercise, it's going to tell me something about my leadership. So then in the debrief, I can say that, right? What did you notice about yourself? And so I think that's key, is preparing them for the debrief. And I also think it's timing. I think I've seen debriefs go on and on and on, and they lose their luster. I think a good facilitator will recognize when there have been some good insights and go out on a high note so that they're leaving the debrief with like, wow. And then they're going to keep processing it on their own. So we've had some group energy around what we've learned, and I'm going to take that. But if you keep going and keep going, then we end the debrief with like, oh my God, I'm so ready to stop talking about this. And so they'll naturally stop thinking about it.
So what makes it good? How do you leave on a high note? What's the cheat sheet for that?
I think it's getting them going. It's getting them sharing their experiences. And I couldn't believe it when you did that. And why did you do that? And so it's getting them talking, and just in asking a question that plants a seed, or asking, Joe, when Brad said that, what were your thoughts? And so that gets Joe and Brad like really engaged. And the key is the participants coming up with the insights.
So I wanted to ask you about that, and I think you teased it a little bit, but how do you facilitate discussion and energy? Because there are plenty of groups, we've all been in groups where somebody asks a question and they come in rah, rah, rah and ask a bunch of questions and everyone just sits on their hands. So what goes into good, just like facilitated discussion, or what creates that good spontaneous discussion?
I think having an observer, if possible, really helps with that. Yeah, because it's an observer that's a part of the group, because they know each other and they know dynamics that the facilitator's not necessarily going to know. And so if you can start with, again, set it up. I think people don't like being put on the spot, right? Again, we're creating safety and openness. So if you say going in, when we get into the debrief, Paul is going to start by sharing his perspective. So Paul's prepared for that. And so when the conversation starts, Paul, what else did you notice? And knowing this group, what did you see that I wouldn't have? I mean, he's naturally so as much as you can infiltrate the energy within the group, the better it is.
I like that. And so I literally read a book called Designing Experiences, which was very good. If you're into that kind of thing, it would be a little dense if you weren't, but it is very good. And they talk about every experience has three elements. There's the pre-experience, the experience, and the post-experience. And we all understand the experience. We all kind of get the sense of the post-experience and the debrief or the reflection period. But I think a lot of us miss the pre-experience and how you set that up. And I think that's what you've been highlighting several times through the conversation here, is the value of setting the right expectations and planting the right seeds in people's heads so that they come in with the right mindset, have the right experience, and then can have the positive debrief on the back end.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the research I was sharing you about when learning fails to occur. 30% of the time, it's the pre-stuff that's missed. We just jump into the experience without setting people up and preparing them. Yeah, that's cool. I'm totally going to check out that book. I love that. I love designing experiences. It's so much fun.
Yeah. And people who listen to this are going to hear me talk about it, because one of the things that came out of the last year of podcast guests that I've had is this sense that the world of work is going to change. Demographics are changing, the makeup of the workforce, the talent that's coming down, the technologies that are around, how much you have to pay. Like, there's just all these factors that are coming up that we're starting to experience but haven't fully experienced yet, that are going to change how work gets done. And I think what the people who are going to win more and more, I believe, are the people who are going to design better work and design better experiences. And it's not just going to be, how do we do this? Or, here's what needs to be done. Go figure it out. How do we do this? But hey, what needs to be done? Let's actually have a design process for how we build that work and make sure that everybody has a good experience while getting the work done in an efficient way. Like that design skill set, I think, is going to be really important.
And for leaders too. I mean, I'm naturally thinking about all the applications for leaders, our team meetings and one-on-ones, and really preparing for those and following up afterwards, and all of those opportunities that we don't often take advantage of to strengthen the experience.
And there's an element to this too. Another great book is Essentialism. If you've read that one, it's basically doing less better is kind of what he talks about. And I think people get overwhelmed by the conversations like the one we're having, where they're like, oh, shit. So you're telling me now I got to go do this. And now I can't just have my person in and do a one-on-one. Now I got to do a pre-one-on-one and a post one-on-one. And I don't have time for this anyway. And so there has to be an element of doing less. And I'm curious, do you coach that at all? Do you see that at all? Like, what thoughts do you have on that?
Oh, you know what I think? I think it's not about what you do as much as it is how you do it. So
tell me more.
Well, the connection in the moment, just being more present and aware in the moment, just makes whatever you're doing so much more effective.
Yeah. But how do we get more present in the moment?
Pay attention.
Yeah. I think part of it is slowing down. I think, and I'm fully guilty of this, that I can get ramped up real high and just be checking off my to-do list. And that doesn't feel real good for the people around me.
No, recently I was walking from my office to the copier, and I walked by a team member's office, and I could see that she was in her office with her head down, and I had a meeting. And so I kept going. I didn't stop and ask. And later that day I went in and checked in on her, and that's a perfect example of, by popping into her office and providing some encouragement or support, like that's much more about how I'm leading than what I'm doing. And I feel like I missed out in that moment. I missed out on a connection opportunity to strengthen my influence with her.
Yeah. And I think that happens all the time in every office. And I read an article the other day about the appropriate level of effort is 85%. And it was talking about athletics and about how if you want to run your fastest or lift your strongest, you need to give an 85% effort, because you can actually go faster if you let yourself calm down a little bit. Your whole body's not redlined, and that actually allows your muscles to put forth a better effort and sustain it for a longer period of time. And the same is true, I think, for thought work, where if you give yourself that little bit of leeway, if you can just settle in at 85%, I think we'd all be even more effective. But it's tough to sit there when there's chaos in the world and we feel like we got to go do 1,000 things.
Absolutely. But we give ourselves a lot more grace too. I love that, because the perfectionists get caught up in doing everything so well. Full throttle.
And again, I say that and it sounds really good. I struggle with that totally, because I've got a high pressure job. I have a wife and 2 children at home. Do a podcast. I told you I'm publishing a children's book next year. I get myself into it too often. It's a recurring cycle for me. So I do as I say, not as I do.
Right. But you're aware of it. That's the key.
Yes. The next thing is doing something about it. There's one question I want to ask. I have a couple sort of more generic questions, I guess, that I usually wrap up with. But I do have one more question, because when we were prepping, you said it takes 7 years for obstacles to go away. And I purposely did not ask you to expand on that when we chatted, because I wanted to save it. But I do want to get your thoughts on it. Can you tell me more about that?
So it comes from a researcher named Kurt Wright. He wrote a book called Breaking the Rules, Removing the Obstacles to High Performance. And in his research, he basically is saying that we approach goal setting backwards. Because if you think about, most people set goals from a place of deficit or lack, or I don't like what's happening in my life, so I'm going to set a goal to change it. Weight loss is a perfect example. Like you don't ever hear anybody say like, I've got this future vision of myself, and so I'm setting a goal to get there. It's like, nope, I don't like what's happening today. These jeans don't fit, or I've gained 10 pounds, or so I'm going to lose weight. And the challenge with that is then it's really hard to get on a roll because you're starting from a place of ickiness. So it takes the average person 7 years in the future before we cannot name obstacles. It's harder, much harder to name obstacles.
Say that again. I'm not sure I understand.
So it takes the average person going out 7 years into the future.
Thinking out 7 years.
Thinking out 7 years into the future. It's really hard to name obstacles out 7 years.
That far out.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we're freed up to imagine possibilities or things looking a lot different. That's just the way our brains work on average.
Got it. So what you're saying is you have to, if you want to make a change, you have to project what it's going to be like 7 years or more from now.
Well, I don't know if you want to make a change. I think that's the place to start from a goal setting perspective.
Okay.
So maybe yes, it is change. I guess I had never thought of it in that way. The goal setting process is going out 10 years to cast a vision. What do I want my life in that area to look like in 10 years? It's going to be hard to come up with obstacles. I'm freed up to imagine the possibilities 10 years out. And then you can say, okay, if that's the future picture, what do I need to start doing today?
How do we get on that path? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a much more positive picture. So I'm going to get on a roll more easily than I would if I was starting from a place of lack.
I like that. And I like that because I like the concept of finding the right path to get on now that leads you where you want to be later. That resonates a lot.
Well, it's a very different mindset. It's responding versus reacting. I'm not reacting to something. I'm responding to what I want from a place of what I want.
Yeah. It's just acting. You get to act now in the way that you want to.
Right.
Yeah. When it comes to leadership development, everything that it is that you do, what are you sick of talking about?
Training. I'm sick of talking about training.
All right.
If anybody else asks me to come and do a 2-hour training workshop, I don't know what I'll do, but no, I won't do it. I'm not interested in that anymore. I mean, there are people that will do that. If you want an intro to leadership or you want somebody to come talk about leadership, there's a lot of people that can do that. Like if you really want growth to happen, that's what I like. Again, I love creating an experience where people can struggle and focus and get some accountability and support and talk about the shit that's not working well. Talk about areas that they want to improve or be better. That's what I'm interested in.
I love that. And that probably answers the follow-up question, which is what aren't people talking enough about, which I would guess your answer would be growth. But if you have a different one, feel free.
Yeah, I think growth. I love all the conversation right now on psychological safety. I know that people roll their eyes, but it's indicative of the shift that's happening in the workplace. And it's what you talked about the experiences, creating better experiences. And it's really fun. I mean, I've been doing this work for over 20 years. So I started my career at a global firm called Premier Farnell, and I was doing leadership development in Premier Farnell. And I remember working really hard to make the case for why we should do this work. O'Brien, I cannot remember the last time a client or a CEO told me I needed to make the case. Like it's just the right thing to do. And so now, it's just until we can speed it up. For me, there is a global readiness for leadership development in a way that there has never been before. it's really fun. Just being able to go so much deeper with this work, because the readiness is there. Like we're craving it. We're craving depth, and we're craving challenge in new way. We're craving vulnerability. We're craving a knowingness about ourselves. We're ready for it. And I'm so grateful to get to do the work. I also have such an abundance mentality for competitors and people that are doing this work in my space, because it's so important. And the way in which I talk about it isn't going to resonate with everyone. Other leaders can talk about it in a way that connects with them. I mean, I think the more people talking about growth and safety in the workplace, and creating an environment where people feel like they can be their whole selves, like I'm so grateful that we're having that conversation. I feel like I just totally got up on a soapbox.
I think I've done it 3 times already in this conversation. So you're in good company. The last question that I ask, or second to last, is what is the purpose of business?
Oh, that's such a good question. So this is Andrea Butcher's answer. To create a place for people to grow and become more of who they already are. I don't think the workplace is a forum. It's context. One thing I say a lot is wherever you go, there you are. I can learn a lot about myself if I'm open to it based on how I respond in a crazy Starbucks line or a crazy traffic jam. Just like I can learn a lot about myself at work because there's relationships there. Just like I can learn so much about myself within my family dynamic because there are relationships there. So the workplace it's just another forum for learning. I mean, isn't that what life is? Isn't that why we're here? To grow and to learn. And I'm getting philosophical on you, but I think that's the purpose of business.
I do a podcast on personal development and interpersonal skills and people strategy. So you're in good company with that. I love that. I love it. Andrea, thank you for coming on the show today. For folks who are still listening, who want more Andrea Butcher in their lives, where can people find you, find your company, engage with you, learn more about what you do?
That's so good. So our leadership podcast is Being at Work. So definitely check us out there. We do a daily dose of leadership that's 2 to 3 minutes. A great way to start your day. And then a longer episode on Thursdays. HRDleadership.com is where you can learn more about the business and the work that we're doing. And follow me on LinkedIn as well. I put out a lot of leadership content.
Fantastic. And we will link to all of those in the show notes. So encourage people to check that out. Andrea, this is a wonderful and refreshing conversation. We were both talking about how we're actually recording this right before the holidays. And this is, I think, the last work thing we both have to do before going to enjoy ourselves. So really appreciate you coming on. And I think there's a ton here for people to take away. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the work you're doing.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.